for joining us today. Thanks everyone joining us for this COAST training focused on new and updated tools for resilience. My name is Andrew. I work for Mississippi State University Extension Program, and I'm supported through the Mississippi Alabama Sea Grant Consortium. And a big part of what I do is work with coastal stakeholders on building resilience to future flooding. A big component of resilience nowadays is utilizing the resilience tools and websites that are out there, but oftentimes it can be hard to keep up with all of the different types of tools that are available. And as new tools are coming out, keeping updated with what new information is available. So today I'm going to go through just a few tools that coastal stakeholders like yourself might be able to utilize, whether it's for resilience planning, resilience projects, or just resilience communication and outreach for your various communities. So first, I'm going to go over a few logistics before we get too far. First of all, we're going to be covering 4 different online tools today. We'll spend about 10 minutes on each tool. I'll be giving you a brief summary of what each tool does, as well as walking you through some of the various screenshots that will highlight functions within those tools. The best way to learn how to use these tools is to kind of fiddle with them yourselves and follow along as we go. So if you're able to pull up these tools on your own while we're watching this presentation, please just pull up another screen and kind of click through them on your own. I'm going to go through these nice and slow, so you'll have opportunities to kind of click through them on your own. And at the end of each of these sections, we're going to have a little bit of time too, where you can kind of click through for a few minutes. And if you have questions, you can ask any questions. We're going to be putting the links to each of these tools into the chat. At the end of this presentation, we're also going to provide a document that has the links to these tools as well, so that you can refer to those at a later point in time. But if you want to follow along with us, look in the chat and we'll have those links to each tool that I'm talking about in the chat. I'm also going to just kind of say what the URL is if you want to just type it yourself. If you have any questions, they can be typed in the chat. Keep in mind, we're going to be having a brief pause for questions at the end of each tool. So we'll save a couple minutes after each tool so that y'all can ask any questions that you have. Keep in mind, though, I'm not the developer of any of these tools. I'm simply helping to highlight some of our federal and regional partners and help communicate the extent of those tools to the greater community. So I might not be able to answer some of the in-depth questions you have about these tools, but if there is a specific type of question you have, we can connect you with the actual tool developers themselves if there's a in-depth question or an answer you would like to get. After each tool, we're going to take a small break, like I had said. So I'll answer any questions that you have put in the chat at that point. So we'll take a pause and we'll moderate the questions there. And we'll also save some time at the end of the presentation if anyone has questions at the end. And then at the end of this presentation, we'll have a brief survey. I very much appreciate if y'all would take the time to fill that out. We're always trying to learn and do better at these types of presentations. So if you have any input on different types of tools that I could provide, different types of information that would be pertinent to you all, or if you just have suggestions or recommendations, we'd love to hear those types of things as well. All right, so without further ado, like I mentioned, my name is Andrew Medhurst. I work for a program called PLACE, which is a really long acronym that stands for the Program for Local Adaptation to Climate Effects. We're based in Southern Mississippi. We're located in Biloxi, and we're supported through Mississippi State University Extension and through the Sea Grant, Mississippi Alabama Sea Grant Consortium. Overall, the purpose of our program is to increase community resilience to changing climate conditions and the associated hazards and impacts. And a big part of that job now is talking about tools that can help our various coastal stakeholders. So our program overall, we operate on basically 3 main principles. We're trying to understand risks. So we work with teams of researchers and scientists and federal workers that are out there, and we're learning as much as we can about the types of risks as it becomes available. So as these new types of tools are becoming available, we're digesting how this information and this data works and finding ways that we can integrate it in what we do. Once we understand that risk, we then communicate that risk. So we then package it in a form that is then beneficial to various different types of audiences along the Gulf Coast. And then it's not enough just to communicate that information. We also help facilitate action to address those risks. So through our multitude of different partners throughout the region, we can help actually make sure that tangible action occurs to address these various different types of risks. So we work throughout the Northern Gulf of Mexico. So you've probably seen me before talking about different types of topics. But today, like I said, one of the things that we really like to focus on is tools. If you've ever tried Google searching for climate resilience tools, you'll find that there's a lot of different types of tools out there designed for various different types of coastal professionals with different functions, different outputs, and different types of data, depending on what it is you're looking for. So oftentimes, one of the biggest questions I get from some of the coastal stakeholders that we work with is, which tool am I supposed to be using? And honestly, there's a lot of different tools that you can use for any specific purpose. But there's some most commonly used tools that we use throughout the region that I'm going to show you all today. So you can think of these as some of like our greatest hits. So today, the tools that I'm going to be highlighting are historical hurricane tracks. Given that hurricane season is coming up, I figured this would be an appropriate time to talk about some of the different tools that we have to access historical hurricane information so that we can learn from some of these past experiences and then make better decisions and hopefully implement better practices to prepare us for future storms. We're also going to take a look at the NOAA Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper. This allows us to look at various types of flood exposure mapping and overlay that with different types of societal information and development information so that we can kind of communicate how flood exposure will impact various different aspects of coastal communities. We're also going to take a look at the Coastal Inundation Dashboard. This is a relatively new tool that allows us to look at not only real-time flooding information, but also access historical flooding information from tide stations all throughout the United States. And then lastly, we're going to finish up by looking at a tool that allows us to look at the combined effects of sea level rise and storm surge. So we know that sea level rise is increasing in the Gulf of Mexico, but what does that mean for storms in the future? 30 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, we know that these storms will have different impacts. So how will the storm surge look once we also add sea level rise to that? So these are the 4 types of tools we're going to be looking at today. So like I said, we're going to spend about 10 minutes on each of these tools, and I'm going to have screenshots to walk you through some of the various features of these tools, and then I'll also demonstrate a live demo of what the tool looks like. Keep in mind, most of these tools that we're going to go through are national scale tools, so it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to be able to use these anywhere in the United States. Some of them even work worldwide. But these NOAA tools that we're going to be highlighting today, historical hurricane tracks, coastal flood exposure mapper, and the coastal inundation dashboard, these are national scale tools, so it doesn't matter where you are, these tools will be beneficial to you. And then since we are in the Northern Gulf of Mexico, we do have a regional tool that I'm going to be talking about today. And unfortunately, this tool does only work currently in coastal Mississippi, coastal Alabama, and then the coastal region in the panhandle of Florida. So if you're outside of that region, this tool won't be able to work for you. But I imagine a lot of our stakeholders are within those boundaries. So hopefully this tool will be useful for those audiences. All right, so let's get into it. So the first tool that I'm going to talk about is the NOAA Historical Hurricane Tracks. So we're going to go ahead and put the link to that tool in the chat now. All right, and if you aren't able to just copy that link from the chat, if you just want to type it into the search bar, if you just simply type coast.noaa.gov/hurricanes, this will take you to this website. So this website will allow us to view historical information of worldwide major storms and hurricanes. We can compare the paths, wind speeds, and pressure from over 13,000 different storms across the world, dating back all the way to the 1850s. And with a lot of these storms, we can actually download individual reports from the National Hurricane Center for each storm and look at some of the specific impacts that these storms have had on various communities. So I'm going to give you all a second to find your way to this tool, and I'm going to start going through some screenshots to demonstrate how you actually utilize the functions within this tool. So first of all, you're going to find a screen like this, just a big search bar, and that's pretty much it. Here you can type through various different things. You can search through location. Location can be a city, a state, or even zip code if you want to. By searching location, this will match you with only the hurricanes that have passed through those specific locations. So keep in mind, These locations are often affected by hurricanes that do not actually physically pass through that city. So, for example, something like Hurricane Katrina, although it affected the entire northern Gulf of Mexico, if I typed in specifically, for example, Pensacola, that storm is not going to show up as one of the documented storms for the city of Pensacola. So what you can do is you can start off broad, and then as you kind of look through some of the storms that you're looking for, you can then utilize some of the filters within to narrow your search functions. But if you do know that there's a specific storm that hit your specific city within the boundary lines of your city, you can find that exact storm and it will match you with that. So one of the best ways that I start off, you can start off by searching an entire state. If you live in Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, heck, the entire northern Gulf of Mexico, if you type in a state, you'll be very quickly inundated with sometimes over 100 different storms that have hit these areas. So that may not always be the best way to do it, but like I said, we can filter down and start going down to counties, start going down to cities, or even zip codes to narrow down your search results. We can also search by hurricane names. So let's say there's a specific hurricane that you know impacted your community 15 years ago. If you want to find information on that exact storm, you can just type in the name of that hurricane. In some instances, there's iterations where there have been multiple storms with the same name, but in major storms of record, there's usually only going to be one storm. So if we type in Hurricane Andrew, for example, it will let you find information for that exact storm, and then you can find information pertaining to only that storm. Another option is you can also search by year. Let's say you knew that there was a particular hurricane that passed through in 2017, but you can't quite remember what storm it was exactly or what time of the year it was, and you want to find out what the effects were and what some of their damages were from that storm. You can just simply type in a year. You can type 2017, 2019, 2023, and it will match you with every storm that happened that year so that you can then filter through those storms on any given year. So whether it's location, hurricane name, or year, you could use this search function to find different hurricanes. Once you've actually completed a search, this is essentially what your screen might look like. So on this example here, I just limited it to the entire state of Mississippi. And as you can see, there are 77 matching storms that it has now demonstrated on this screen for me. So there's a lot to look here. You can see it's color coded, so it helps you a little bit. But for the most part, this is just too much to look at. So this is where some of the functions of the tool are going to come in. So on the left side of the screen, you can see storm matches. This is where you can find all the individual storms. If you click on any of these individual storms, you can find the information about that storm. You can also see, like I said, all the various storm tracks. They're color coded based on the intensity of the storm. So ranging from tropical storms all the way up to Category 5, that's how they're color coded. And then at the top here, you can see there are various filters. You can filter these storms based off of their category, the pressure. You can sort them by the year. And then you can also adjust the range that it's actually limiting these storms to. So let's, for example, use Katrina as an example. If I expand the range of that filter, it will then allow me to pick up a storm like Hurricane Katrina if we expand the range beyond Mississippi. So you can see it's set to nautical miles. So by just increasing that to maybe 200 nautical miles, you'll then be able to pick up storms outside of the range. Page like this allows you to see various types of information about that storm. You'll see the year that that storm happened and the dates that it actually impacted the coasts. You'll see the storm tracks, including that same color-coded track that allows you to see the intensity of the storm. So you can see here we're looking at Hurricane Ida from 2021. And then one of the coolest features of this tool is on the top here. I don't know why they made the button so small, but right above where it says Ida, you can see there's a little PDF icon and it says Download Storm Reports. If you click that button, it allows you to download the entire storm report for these storms and access all sorts of information for these specific storms. So these storm reports are available from the National Hurricane Center, and they're available for most major storms. So Category 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and even a lot of tropical storms will often have these storm reports available from the National Hurricane Center. And depending on the severity of the storm, these reports can sometimes be hundreds of pages long. Inside each of these reports, you'll find information containing meteorological data and stats, damage assessments with screenshots and imagery from each storm, as well as forecast and warning critiques and lessons learned from each of these hurricanes. So with a lot of us working in communication and working with coastal stakeholders, this is the time of the year where a lot of communities are looking to communicate information about hurricanes and learn how we can just communicate this information better to a vast array of audiences. So this tool is extremely helpful to kind of look back at hurricanes that have affected communities in the past and see some of the lessons that they've learned in these communities and find some takeaways that you can use to implement in your own areas. So that's the national or the NOAA Historical Hurricane Tracker. So we're going to take one of those pauses here to start looking at some questions. And while we're waiting for questions in the chat, I'll go ahead and pull up the website myself so you can see what that looks like in case you're unable to follow along. I think there might be All right, so like I said, this is what the main search bar would look like for the hurricane tracker. So let's say, for example, I live in the city of Biloxi. So if I just type in Biloxi, it allows me to then click the exact location here. And then you can see it's trying to find matching storms too, but since there's not a storm named Biloxi, that's not relevant. But keep in mind, it will also allow you to find storms this way. So you can see by limiting it to the city of Biloxi, if I zoom in here, it's only showing me storms that have passed within 60 nautical miles of the city limits of the city of Biloxi. So you can see it's picking up storms from all over this area, basically coastal Mississippi. And on the left here, I can see all those different types of storms. And as I just hover over each individual storm, you can see the paths they took. So once again, this can be helpful if you're trying to find information about a particular storm that you might not know the name of. But you remember that it impacted a certain area and you took a certain path. You can find them this way. And when you're ready to actually get information on that storm, let's say we want to look at Zeta. Click on that storm, and you'll see the specific details, including the categories, the wind speed, and then some of the finer details if you're looking for more specific information, like some of the meteorological information. And then once again, like I had mentioned previously, there's this very small button at the top here that says View Storm Report. When you click on that, it's going to bring up the actual document here with all sorts of information about that specific storm, damage statistics, information about how it affected different regions, cities, municipalities. And it's also going to have all sorts of data and information about some of the meteorological data pertaining to that storm. So this is a wealth of information if you're trying to find any type of things about hurricanes or about how hurricanes have impacted communities in the past and about how potential hurricanes upcoming could impact those same communities. So I'll pause for a second if anyone has any immediate questions about the historical hurricane tracks tool. That doesn't look like we have any questions, so I'm going to move on to the next tool. So next up, we have another NOAA tool that's excellent for visualizing and communicating the impacts of various types of flooding to coastal communities throughout the United States. So this is the NOAA Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper. If you want to find this tool yourself, simply type in coast.noaa.gov/flood exposure, and it will take you to the tool. The features of this tool allow you to create custom maps with various layers, including flood hazards, societal exposures, infrastructure exposure, and ecosystem exposure. And then the best feature of this tool is it allows you to save these custom maps as JPEGs so that you can share this imagery and various types of reports or communication tools that you might be trying to utilize. I'll give everyone a few seconds if you want to find this tool on your own. And I think we can post, yep, the link is in the chat. So this is what that tool looks like. I've kind of zoomed into the Mississippi Gulf Coast region here. And there's a few things I want to point off. First of all, you can search by a specific address. You'd be surprised. You can actually type in your exact home address and allow you to zoom on these areas. Um, Honestly, though, one of the best ways to do this is to just use the zoom functions in the bottom left corner to just zoom in and out of broad regions. But if there is a specific area, you can type in city name, but you can also just type in exact addresses if you're looking to find a specific landmark or a specific point. Left-hand side here, you can see there's a bunch of toggles that get toggled just simply on and off. These are all of your different flood hazard layers and exposure layers. So on the top, you can see the different flood hazard layers. The very top option there is a coastal flood hazard composite. Essentially, what that is a combined imagery of high tide flooding, tsunami flooding, which doesn't really affect this region, storm surge flooding, sea level rise flooding, and then once again, something that doesn't affect this region, Great Lake water levels. So essentially, it's looking at all of these different inputs of flooding and then overlaying them all together. So that's what we're looking at right here, the coastal flood hazard composite, which is just showing you a combined imagery reference of all the different types of flood exposure that a region might get. Keep in mind, you can only have one of these toggled on at a time. So for example, you can't toggle on high tide flooding and storm surge, but what you can do is you can toggle on this one, which essentially is just toggling everything on. Further down, you'll see that there's also different layers. These are exposure layers. Once again, these are simply just toggled on and off. And these are different categories for societal exposure, things like population density, poverty, elderly populations. They also have infrastructure exposure, which includes critical facilities and developmental patterns. And then the last category is ecosystem exposure, which includes information about natural areas and wetlands. So depending on it is what you're looking for, you can toggle these various layers on and off. So let's say you're a natural resource manager. You want to look at how future flooding is going to impact marsh growth in your region. So what you're going to do is you're going to toggle on these different hazard layers, and then you're also going to go into the ecosystem exposure layers and toggle some of those features. Let's say you're a city manager, though, and you're wanting to look at how you can redevelop an area based off of the needs of a community. You may be more interested in some of the different types of societal exposure or infrastructure exposure toggles. Once again, though, keep in mind, you can only keep one of these toggled on at any given time. So here's an example of what some of these toggles look like. So once again, I mentioned you can only choose one exposure layer at a time. So if I click the exposure layer for critical facilities, for example, you can see all these little greenhouses with flags on top now. These are all indicating critical facilities. There's also hospitals and fire stations that are marked now. So that allows you to overlay where are our critical facilities in relation to flood exposure. This allows you to look at, oh, maybe we should relocate the fire station that's projected to be underwater in the next 15 years. It also allows you to see areas where we know that we have safe infrastructure that may not need immediate recognition. And then, so one of the cool functions of this tool is you can click Save Map, that big blue button there at the bottom, and it's going to save the map with the toggles if you've functioned to your saved maps within this website. So although you can't toggle multiple layers all simultaneously, you can simultaneously save multiple different maps that compare different types of information. So once you've saved a map, you'll see in the Saved Maps tab there that's kind of grayed out that you'll have different maps that you've saved throughout your progress. So this is what that would look like. I'm in now the Saved Maps tab, and you can see I saved that exact map we're looking at that has an overlay of coastal flood hazard composite combined with an overlay of where all the critical facilities are. And then now, once I have that, I can download that map by clicking that very small, I don't know why they make these icons so tiny. But you can click that very tiny icon there and it allows you to download a JPEG of what you see here on the screen. So let's say you're creating a resilience assessment or a resilience report or a vulnerability assessment for your community. Or let's just say you're trying to communicate something to a particular facility. Information like this is very beneficial to communicate relation of different types of societal, developmental, or environmental information combined with flood exposure. There's another option too. Let's say you're trying to do like a web, like a live stream like we're doing right now. If I wanted to just share a link to this map, you can also click that second icon there, and it allows you to download a bit.ly link URL so that you can easily link access to what it is that you're looking at to other people so they can see the things you reference. We're going to pause again for questions, and then I'm going to pull up the actual tool itself so you can see what that looks like quickly.
Andrew, we did have a question in the chat. I did respond, but the question was, I'm unable to see the layers on the map. How do I see the layers? I did respond about the little icon in the bottom left corner, toggle layer selector, but I wanted to just see if anyone else had that question. Maybe you can show people visually how to find the map before that layer pops up.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll just show you what it looks like starting from the beginning. So here's the main screen of the coastal flood exposure mapper. Once you click get started, it will just launch you right into the map. Here you can just kind of drag around and look at regions, depending on where you are. Let's say you know you're in New Orleans, you can just zoom in with your mouse into these regions. And then, like I said, you can actually type into the search bar. Let's say you wanted to just zoom into New Orleans. This allows you to actually zoom into specific areas. And then to access those layers, once again, I don't know why they make these buttons so small, but in the very bottom left corner here, you can see these three black tiles stacked on top of each other. That's the toggle layers button. And then it brings up this sidebar here that allows you to toggle all the different layers I have in reference. So by default, I believe the coastal flood hazard composite is what is checked automatically. But remember, you can only have one on at a time. So if you're looking for specific information, let's say you only want sea level rise information, you can then toggle the sea level rise option. And you can see here on the bottom, I now have the option with another toggle that allows me to change the amount of sea level rise that we're seeing. So this is helpful if you want to then overlay it with other things, like let's say population density, or poverty, or elderly population. This is going to use census data. That's where this information is coming from. So it's overlaying census tracts on top of that map. So let's zoom back into like Southern Louisiana, for example, and you can toggle the layer opacity so that you can kind of see a little bit easier and see what's underneath some of these layers. Like, so there are those census tracts that I was talking about. You can see the darker regions indicate areas where there's more elderly. So let's see what happens. Look, if we look at sea level rise, you can see some of these populations are more vulnerable than others. So this just enables you to compare different types of flooding and then look at societal infrastructure and ecosystem exposure and kind of compare how these things will be affected going into the future. Okay, I think that happens a lot. The buttons of these are so small, it's so easy for them to get covered up by just different things within like the Zoom feed. So I'll show you how I save a map real quick. Let's say I want to do the composites, and we're going to look at this area, and I want to overlay it with, let's look at natural areas and open space. You can see it's added that layer for natural areas, and I want to save this so I can come back to it in the future. You can see now it's in my saved maps over here. So I can access it, I can download it as a JPEG, depending on if you want the legend, the title, or just the map by itself. And you can see it downloaded the map up here in the top. And then if you wanted to share the link, it allows you to just copy it as a bit.ly link that you can then share with others. So Cool tool. I think it's excellent for people that are needing to communicate how flooding will impact various different components of society, whether you're talking with city managers, natural resource managers, or developers. There's all sorts of information you can talk about flooding. So let's go back to presentation. Give it a second if there's any other questions. Let's go ahead and go into the next tool. This is our third tool, keep in mind. So the next one is the NOAA Coastal Inundation Dashboard. We're going to put the link in the chat. If you want to type in the actual tool itself, it's tidesandcurrents.noaa.gov/inundation DB. The DB is for dashboard. I'll give you a second if you want to find that tool. And the big features of this tool are you can see real-time and historic coastal flooding. You can get detailed historic flood information for each NOS water level station. And you can view areas experiencing active flooding or active tropical storm flooding and watches and warnings as they're happening. So there's none happening right now, so I won't be able to demonstrate that exactly, but I can show you some of the functionalities of this tool. So this is what it looks like when you pull up the screen. You'll see the map has a bunch of little light blue markers scattered all across the coast. These are all the different National Ocean Service water level gauges. So on the left, you can see a list with all of the different stations on your left here. They're just listed out, but you can also click on all of them individually on the map, and you can access that information. In the top right corner, you can see the different types of map layers. There's things like looking at sea level rise, but like I said, you can also look at active hurricane warnings and watches, active flooding watches and warnings. Then you can also toggle some of these other various flood imagery. Some of the ones that I find useful is this little orange house icon for impact graphics. We'll get back to that one in a second. Then at the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see that there's a key. So as you toggle different layers, this key will pop up, and within the key itself, it has another small toggle depending on what it is that you're enabling. And this will allow you to change the characteristics of that layer. So for example, when you toggle on the sea level rise filter, it allows you to actually increase the amount of sea level rise that you're seeing on the screen with that slider bar there. So as an example, let's zoom in to South Louisiana. So you can see we're kind of looking at New Orleans and some of the areas south of New Orleans. You can see the sea level rise filter has been overlaid to show the inundation from future projected sea level rise. But now let's start looking again for those blue pins. You can see here there's a couple of them. Remember, these are National Ocean Service water level stations. So you can see them here. There's one kind of in New Orleans, and then there's one on the bottom there. And you can see it's got a little red ring around it. I'm going to show you when I show you the actual website. But when you see that little red ring around a tide station, that means that tide station is currently flooding as we speak. So it's a really cool way to see active flooding as it's happening at tide stations all across the country. So earlier today, when I was just looking at this website to kind of put this presentation together, there is stations throughout southern Louisiana that were currently receiving flooding. There are stations along the East Coast right now that, because of the storms that have been happening, are currently actively flooding. So depending on when you're looking at these, you may see some of these tide stations with that red circle kind of flashing on them. That's just showing you that they are currently flooding. So it enables you to kind of, oh, maybe I should look at this tide station here and look at some of the information pertaining to it. If you look at this, some of the things you can toggle on, I mentioned that you can toggle on that little orange house button. When you do that, you'll see there's little houses that pop up all over the place. What those are is think of those like snapshots in time that we can go back and look at an example of certain flooding thresholds and what it physically looks like in that community. So I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like here in a second. But that's what those little orange icons are. So first, I want to show you what it looks like to actually pull up information on the specific tide stations. So when I click on one of those blue pins, it'll pull up a screen that looks like this. And what this has is the current water height. So what you're seeing is today's water height. So you can see it's going up and down depending on whether it's high tide, low tide. But what you also see is across the top there, that yellow, red, and pink bar, those are flooding thresholds. So sometimes it might be a spring tide. Sometimes there might be something like storm surge combined with that. Sometimes there may be a hurricane coming in. And you'll actually see this current water level height breach into these different thresholds, indicating that you are now crossing the flooding thresholds that were identified by these communities. So for example, right now you can see it's going to get close to the minor flooding threshold in this tide station that I pulled up, but it's not actually going to cross that threshold. But, you know, next week, let's say we pull up this same thing and in a particularly, you know, very full moon, this might look different. You might see that, hey, this morning at about 9 a.m., we're going to expect that it's going to breach our minor flooding threshold. And we know to expect that there's going to be water in the roads in these certain locations. So you can think of this as a way to help kind of predict where you might see problematic flooding. If you know nuisance flooding or high tide flooding is something that occurs in specific areas, this is really helpful to kind of identify when that's going to happen. Across the bottom here, you'll see additional information. When you click on each of these blue words across the bottom here, it will take you to another page that has all sorts of historical information about that specific tide station that lets you go look back at time at what some of the flooding thresholds were. So for example, when we click that very first button there that says inundation history page, it brings you to a page like this. Across the top, you'll see different types of categories you can filter for inundation histories. You can see water level data, historical flood days, the top 10 flooding events of all time, sea level rise trends. But what you can also do is you can go back in time and look at what these water levels look like at a specific date and time or a specific range in time. So if you know a specific big hurricane happened on a date, you can actually just type in that date, limit it to that specific time, and then see where did the water levels get when Hurricane Katrina passed, or how high did the water get when we had Hurricane Zeta pass through. This allows you to find those thresholds so that you can kind of compare what to expect from future comparable storms. And then one of the other categories that I like to look at within this is the top 10 water level events. So you can see it's the third tab across the top here. And essentially what this is looking at is what were the 10 most significant flooding events in the history of this tide gauge that you can go back and look at. And so you can see that they're tracked by date, but more often than not, they're associated with a specific event, which you can see oftentimes is a hurricane or a tropical storm. So this allows you to look at like, what was the worst flooding we've seen in this location and how high did it get? And what does it look like when we had a Category 5 pass through compared to when it looks like when we had a Category 1 pass through. So this kind of just lets you look at the top 10 flooding events for each specific tide station and that little region surrounding those top stations. So you can get an idea of what they've been through in the past. Like I mentioned, you can see those events there. And when you click on each event, it'll actually give you additional information. So moving along, the other thing I wanted to show you with this tool has a lot of functionalities. I think you can spend a lot of time kind of just clicking through this tool. But I think one of the cool things that they've included is that little orange house icon, impact graphics. So if you see one of those on the screen and you click on it, what it's going to show is a snapshot in time of that exact spot and what it looks like when it experienced one of those flooding thresholds. So for example, when I click on this one near Lafourche Parish in Louisiana, you can see here on the bottom, they experienced reaching their minor flooding threshold and almost got to their moderate flooding threshold, which would have been about 3 feet of flooding. And this is physically what it looked like for that community. So it got to 1.83 feet above the mean high or high water. So you can see what that physically looked like in that community where they received that minor level of flooding. And some people, they might not consider that a minor level of flooding. So it's helpful to kind of assess, what does minor flooding look like in our community? What does major flooding look like in our community? So when you see those orange house icons, make sure to click on those and you can actually see these little snapshots in time. Some of them have minor flood events, some of them have more major flooding. So you'll see a varying degree of extremes. Oh, and like I said, the historical examples of the flooding with images. All right, so I'm going to take another little pause here for questions. The APIs to connect from our applications and stuff and blending into all these sites. The, mm, there are currently not applications for a lot of these. They're all currently hosted through NOAA or through mirrored websites, but I can share at the end, I can share links to all of these external links. And then we also have mirrored forms of these websites. I don't know if I have them available right now, but I can share these with you in the future. There's been concerns about some of these websites going down and not being accessible because of some of the functionality of them. But a lot of these tools have been replicated elsewhere. So even if they were removed from their federal websites, they're still available elsewhere. But I'll come back to this and about getting alternative access. So I'll quickly go through the inundation dashboard. We're kind of running out on time. So here's an example. Let's say we want to look at the city of Mobile. If I zoom into this area, you can see it limits only the tide stations that are within view of where my screen can see right now. So let's say we want to see the tide station here right in the middle of Mobile, at the Mobile State Docks. You can see today they got actually quite close to their minor flooding threshold. This is just simply because regular high and low tides cycles. But you can go back in time and look at when they've experienced some of those breaches and thresholds and what those thresholds look like. Like I said, you can click on these buttons across the bottom in order to access additional information. This allows you to look at dates back in time. So if you wanted to go back to 2002 for this exact day, you can get access to that information and see what it looked like a year ago today. And then, like I said, you can also look at what are the top 10 events for this location. You can see all the different storms we've had here. And then if I go, so if I go back to the tool here, now let's see these orange houses. Here's what it looked like when they experienced a moderate flood event on Water Street in downtown Mobile, Alabama. So you can see it was 3.62 feet above the mean high water. And there's an 18-wheeler passing through here, kind of showing just how much that inundation affected the transportation on that given day. So it's kind of just a cool snapshot to show what it looked like when we experienced these flooding thresholds. The live update is very helpful. Oh yeah, let me show you. Let me see if I can find some really quickly. If I can find some of the so right here. I don't know if you can see it while I'm screen sharing right now, but I'm zooming into South Louisiana, and there's a couple of these tide stations that are pulsating this red ring. Morgan City, there's one south of Morgan City. There's a couple over here in Lake Charles. So these are places that are currently experiencing that minor flooding threshold at a minimum. And I think there was some along the East Coast earlier today. Yep. So if we look at the Northeast right now, if you look along like some of like the DC, Philadelphia corridor, there's a few tide stations right here right now that are currently experiencing flooding. So when we click on those, you can actually see why it's being triggered. You can see that it's just gotten into that minor flooding threshold there. So any given day, it may be more interesting than another day. But if you're working in a community and you're not physically on the ground, it's a helpful way to see like how certain areas are affected by sometimes just big storms that are passing through. Okay, and then we'll go back to our last tool. We'll move a little bit quicker since we're running low on time. So this last tool is called, it's a long name. I don't know why they named it this long. Coastal Dynamics of Sea Level Rise, Simulated Storm Surge. The link is in the chat. If you want to type it in, we've created an abbreviated URL a long time ago. It's gomsurge.org. I know we're going to have to change it to GOAA surge.org. We'll get to it. But for now, gomsurge.org takes you to this website. And remember, this is our regional tool. So this one will only work in Mississippi, Alabama, and the Panhandle of Florida. This tool allows you to visualize projected impacts of current and future storm surge. We can also look at historical storm surge from past storms to see how they impacted different communities. And we can also view areas experiencing active flooding or active tropical storm warnings. Just once again, another iteration of that. So we go up to the websites, and this is what the splash page looks like. The navigation is on the left here. You can see these really small black icons. Once again, the theme of the day is really small icons for these tools. If you click each one of those individual black dots, it takes you to a different category of storm surge visualizations. So when you click on that first black dot, it explains how this tool works. It explains that it's modeling future storm surge that's been based off of past historical storms of record. And then it combines that with projected future sea level rise for the year 2100. So when you think about a storm that hits today and the impact of the storm surge it has on our communities across the northern Gulf Coast, it's going to be different from what happens even 50 years from now, because even with just a little bit of sea level rise, that storm surge now has a different effect on those communities because it's reaching further and deeper into some of these areas that it previously had not reached. So this tool is just a really good way of showing, here's what storm surge looks like now, and here's essentially where it would go in these situations. But let's look in the future. Let's look at 2100. Is this housing community that we're developing now going to be impacted by storm surge if we consider the additional sea level rise that we're expected to see at that point in time as well? You look at the third black little dots down on the left here. This allows you to look at different types of hurricane surge or storm surge by hurricane. So currently the one for the Northern Gulf that we all talk about is Hurricane Katrina. So essentially what this shows on the top left there, that's basically what the storm surge from a Katrina storm would look like today. So imagine a Katrina-esque storm hits the exact same way, but because we have additional sea level rise that has occurred since Hurricane Katrina, this shows you where that additional flooding is now occurring. As you look to the next box in the top right corner, this is showing you with just a little bit more sea level rise. So top left, this is in a low estimate of sea level rise or the low assumption of sea level rise for the year 2100. The one in the top right is looking at the intermediate low. The one in the bottom left is looking at the intermediate high. And the one at the bottom right is looking at the high. So basically, you can look at a range of how a Katrina-sized storm would affect the storm surge in this region, but from a range of basically about half a foot of sea level rise to over 6.5 feet of sea level rise. So depending on where it is that you're looking at, you can see how that storm surge will affect us. And then I think the most important function of this tool is what's called still water storm surge. This allows you to grab a slider bar and look at essentially present day conditions compared to future conditions. So you can see there's a slider bar right in the middle here. On the left side, you have that gray map with the visualization of storm surge. On the right side, it's colored. So on the left, what we're looking at is the 100-year floodplain under the low sea level rise scenario for the year 2100, which is essentially about a half foot of sea level rise that we've already experiencing. So think of that, what it looks like today. And then on the right here, this is the 100-year floodplain under intermediate high scenario for the year 2100. So essentially, this is what it would look like if we got storm surge with an additional 4 feet of sea level rise in the year 2100. So what you do is you slide this bar left and right, and you can see essentially where the storm surge goes now, and then where the storm surge will go in the year 2100. And you'll see that it's reaching further inland and into areas that it previously didn't. So last pause for questions for this tool, and I'll show you a real quick demonstration of how that slider bar works. So here is that splash page. Like I said, the navigation is here on the left-hand side. If you go down to Stillwater Storm Surge, there's a second to load. Let's just zoom into Mobile, for example. So on the left here, you can imagine this is what storm surge scenarios would look like today. This is essentially where the water would go for a 100-year flood. And then what happens is I drag this across, is it's showing you where the water is now going if we have a 100-year flood with an additional 4 feet of sea level rise, which is essentially what would be projected for the year 2100. So I can slide that back and forth and see how it reaches into areas that it previously did not reach. So for example, let's look like right here, a little bit west of Chickasaw. You can see under today's scenarios for storm surge, it kind of stops here at some of the interstates. But into future conditions, we might see that water reaching a little bit further inland. You can actually type in addresses in the search bar here. It limits you if you zoom in too far. This is not intended for people to look at their exact exposure, so they can decide whether or not to buy flood insurance. It's meant for larger scale decision making. So as I zoom out, here's that address I had mentioned. There's the dot that I just typed in. And I can see if this area is going to be impacted by storm surge as we go into the future. You can see it's reaching a little bit further inland, but it is still in the year 2100 with 4 additional feet of sea level rise, not expected to reach this location. So now is the time. If anyone has any final questions, feel free to chat them to me. My email address is also down there in the bottom right-hand corner. If anyone has any questions or you want me to demonstrate these tools with you, please feel free to email me. This is my job to help you all. So if you would like a little bit more explanations or walkthroughs on these tools or how you can utilize them for different types of decision-making plans, resilience documents, or planning strategies, I can help with that. And then the last thing I want to remind you all before we leave for today is we have a link for the survey. It's in the chat. Please fill out that survey for us. Like I said, it's very helpful for us. I'm always looking to improve these presentations and make sure that we can benefit as many people as possible. So if you have recommendations for things that I can include in the future or ways that we can adjust this presentation, please let me know. It's very, very important for us. But with that said, unless anyone has any other further questions, thank you all for participating in this coast training today on some of our new and updated resilience tools, specifically focusing in on some of the different types of tools that we can use to help us come hurricane season, to look at flooding, coastal flooding and inundation, and different types of hurricane threats. Thanks, everyone.